The Woods Marched In by Agnes Jones Stabner. The woods marched in upon the town, reclaiming what had been their own. That day the last man laid him down, and relatives set up his stone. His home, with all the others, fell into a crumbling disrepair, the cellar but a broken shell to serve some wild thing for a lair. This was his orchard, now a screen of tangled leafage. Can it be that stunted ghost was once a green and civilized young apple tree? The woods moved in on past the frame where industry had set its seal, and built the mill that was to tame the Blackledge River to the wheel. The wall and sluiceway sat with blocks of rugged granite quarried near, still hold their line with strength that mocks the ravage of some future year. But this faint pathway, once a street, is now a hushed and secret link, whose only traffic is the feet of deer come down at dusk to drink. Above the dam their ripples fret against a barrier so old, and yet so strong and firmly set, the stones are blurred with moss and mold. Does the canal here at the side, choked with birch seedlings and dry leaves, remember it was meant to guide water that glances as it weaves? They said 100 years ago, a laborer cried his luck was ill, saying, "'Tis devil's work, I know, to make free water run uphill." Perhaps he felt the atmosphere was charged by the impatient weight of woods forced back, but still I hear that rush of water through the gate. Glad when the wheel could catch it up, content to be flung in a spray of rainbow prisms from each cup, and then released to go its way. That headlong melody no more will animate this still ravine. The river, shrunken from its shore, is fishing ground now for a lean. Brown native mink, only intent on minnows flashing through the pools, oblivious of alien scent, blown back by wind that lifts and cools. The woods closed in on each redoubt, shoulder to shoulder with the sun. When that last candle flickered out, the town was lost, the woods had won. This poem, The Woods Marched In, is written by Agnes Jones Stabner and was published in the Hartford Courant. This poem describes how Gay City State Park became wilderness after it had once been a thriving mill town.
I grew up right near the park. Oftentimes, when you're leaving the town, you drive by it, you see the park, and just growing up near it, you use the park a lot. And people use the park. It's a part of the town. It's definitely a part of the infrastructure of the town and the life here in Hebron. When I was young, the waterfront was always pretty cool. You'd always see people swimming there and stuff, and using that side of it. I think the hiking itself, it's relatively, a lot of it's pretty flat, so it's nice for biking, hiking, just experiencing the outdoors of Hebron. It's what I think a lot of people who stay in this town really enjoy about this town. It's the wildlife, the kind of being off the beaten path. And I think Gay City helps encompass that.
Growing up, I lived in Bolton, Connecticut, and Gay City was actually one of the closest parks where I used to live. So a lot of times there would be events down there with people from the high school or the college. And it was just a nice place to go hang out. There's a little man-made lake down there and some picnic areas, some off-road trailing. And I've always been pretty avid for outdoors. I like hiking. I go wild mushroom picking, metal detecting sometimes. So I liked going there because it was close by. It was very historic.
You can see we're at Gay City State Park. There's the river water going. Not sure what this is. It might be some kind of like search and find hunt, but it says Go Orienteering Incorporated. There's a tag on it, number 52. So I'll try to get a better idea as to what it is.
It's got a lot of hiking and untold history, I feel like, in the park. So when you go there, sometimes you'll see something that's interesting or looks very old and kind of wonder what it is. And it's got a lot of mysteries to the blind eye. Until you get really acquainted with the park is when you really start to learn the history, what really is Gay City. So I think that in itself is pretty intriguing and interesting, especially to people who aren't as familiar with it.
So if you ever go into one of these trails, you'll notice along the way they have one of these maps. They're sometimes very confusing, at least to me. Tells you what trail you're on. I'm not a good map reader. It usually tells you where you are too. It says you are here, right up here. So we're right here between the white and red trail. Guessing that. Now that says it's still the white trail. So that would go probably to the main entrance of the park, I think, because it looks like I saw some remnants from the Sumner House to the main area. And then, if you understand the rest, that's all the trails that go along. You can get this map online too.
I don't know any specific facts, but I believe before Hebron kind of came to be, in Gilead even, Gay City was an old mill town, and there were a few families that had lived there. Old like stone foundations. A lot of those remnants are still at the park. Other than that, I don't know a ton. I've heard some rumors that it's haunted.
There's definitely like two different atmospheres when you go, like in the area that's more catered to park goers, like the swimming area and the picnic tables are a little bit of a different feel than if you're off trail, kind of deep in the woods. Definitely a different feeling.
You can see there's ice up here, and we got some people ice fishing, which is going to be great to get on film. I never even expected that, but we're gonna film them way out there. We sit in this bench. We'll get a good view of them. All right. Let's see. They're ice fishing out there. There's a pond that's all frozen over, and get a good shot. It's hard for me to verify with the sun in my eyes, but looks like they're ice fishing. They're doing something on the ice. Move over a bit. Oh man, the sun's in my eyes. Let me pull out a bit. I can't see over here too well. The sun, so much sun in my eyes. There was another group over here. Let me see if I go in the shade, maybe I can pull it out. If you can see it over here. Right there. Oh man, I can't even see it, but I think it's on camera now. And there they are again. Again, here we are. Here's the water. Water's still running. It's been channeled out from the ice over here. Almost want to go down there and try it out, but again, I got a camera in my hands, so I like crossing a magical bridge for once and then going back. Wet rocks and stuff over there. I'd go up the trails, but I don't really have a lot of battery power. It's pretty cold. I said I'd go here and call it a day, so that's what I'm going to do. I'd like to get deeper in the woods at some point. There's a lot of trees that I saw last year that beavers were hacking up, and it was cool. I saw a whole beaver dam, but I never could find that spot again. Some of these woods are very mysterious here. Getting back to different trails, they all intertwine, so it's very hard to find where you're going, and the maps really don't help, because the maps, they're just not really helpful maps. So I did find an area. I didn't see any beavers, but I saw their dam, and I saw the trees all hacked up by beavers, and pretty interesting. And that was in the winter too. So but I think that was, I don't even know which path it would have been. So it's over by another pond beyond this. So but pretty interesting. So that's been our little adventure of the day, some 25 minutes or so. We didn't go through the whole park, but we went through it. Let me debrief here. Alright, so name is Adam Phelps. I've taken a lot of footage of Gay City Park. I'm continuing to do so. This is about a year-long project. Just trying to get the park in its best interest for what it is today and what it's been in the past. Gone to several different places throughout the country. Well, not very far, but I've been to Florida, I've been to other places on this East Coast. People have heard of the park, Gay City State Park. They know the facilities, what it is today, but not a lot of people know about the history, the ghost stories that surround the park. Despite its recognition, much of the history surrounding Gay City State Park has been forgotten or lost, and the remaining stories many share are subject to legends and folklore. In this documentary, you will meet several professionals who have experienced Gay City State Park through its legends, history, wildlife, and recreational value. My goal is that you will learn about the park and take an interest in its legends and history. These are the stories told over generations that Hebron, Bolton, and Glastonbury natives still share today, from when Elijah Andrus and his Methodists first colonized Gay City in 1796, through the Industrial Revolution and the Civil War, and into the 20th century, where Emma Foster once resided in the last house standing at Gay City State Park. Here you can see a goose. Geese are a prominent part of Gay City State Park. I've been lucky to film geese throughout the spring, summer, fall, and winter. Sometimes I've noticed a couple of them together. Sometimes they're alone, or sometimes there's 5 or 6 of them together. I'm not sure if they're all part of the same family, but the one thing I do know for sure is that Gay City State Park is a great habitat for them to live in. You will see various recordings of geese throughout this segment. I've seen them in many different scenarios and wanted to record their lives here in Gay City.
My name's Ray Hardy. I live here in Bolton. And my association with wildlife has been lifelong. I've lived in the area for about close to 40 years, and a lot of my time has been spent at Gay City. I guess I would classify myself as an artist naturalist, focusing primarily on mammals. In my research, I also do volunteer work for the DEP and have done research projects, a fawn mortality study for 6 years, or actually a 4-year project. Have been out with the guys with the bears. This has been in Western Connecticut, but here at home, I've been involved more recently with the Connecticut Bobcat Project, which is a statewide project, and we captured here in town. We captured 3 bobcats. 2 have collars that I'm currently monitoring their movements and seeing if I can find areas where we have a cluster of points where they're at to see whether or not there might be evidence of what they might be eating. Bobcats like to, for the most part, like to hang out where it's it's places where I wouldn't want to walk. Real thick brambles and brush, stuff like that, that they have little trails they can scoot through and get to where they're going. So that's currently what I'm involved in right now with the bobcats. And Gay City is a popular area for the bobcats. There's a lot of excellent habitat for them, and obviously plenty of food for them too. Just about anything that you would find anywhere in Connecticut will be found somewhere in Gay City State Park. Like I say, there's suitable habitat, and there's a tremendous variety of habitat, all the way from, like I say, swamps, inland wetlands, marshy areas, up into drier wooded areas. Most of the areas mature forest at this point, which determines pretty much the species that you might find. In the ponds, for example, if you go down the paved road down to the pond, just before you go down the hill to the pond, there's a dirt road that runs straight off. You follow that trail, eventually goes up to Birch Mountain, but there's a pond a little ways up, and there's quite a bit of beaver activity. Otters in that area. Don't see mink that much. You'll see otters occasionally, and beaver activity in that pond.
Here we are at the pond still where we found the beaver dams. Looks like DEEP is protecting this area, which is good to know. Connecticut State Land Department of Environmental Protection. So these are where the beaver dams are. We're gonna take a look, see if we see any traces of beaver. So I'm down closer by the pond. See here, this has definitely got to be beaver. It's got beaver written all over it. The tree is moist, which I'm guessing is the beaver's mouths. You can see all the different teeth marks on it, and of course the fallen trees right there. So this has beaver activity written all over it. So there's a dam right over there where you see that goose swimming, and then there's a dam that's over here as well, which is relatively close. And of course we have the tree that's bitten up right here. There's all these wood chips right around it, all wood marks, so you know somebody's been here, and it doesn't look like a chainsaw, so we know it's a beaver. So this is probably the closest I've been to both of those beaver dams. Not much activity. It is early morning. I did read up that beavers are nocturnal. With that being said, they're probably even tough to find at night. And move over here, and we see another beaver dam. But here are their dams over at Gay City State Park. I believe we're at the Blackledge River. Yet another one that beavers took a liking to. And a log laying down here. You can see it's bitten all along the way. There, all up the log. So looks like the beavers have been busy biting this log. They probably took it from this tree, I would assume.
So we've got mink that'll be around the wet areas, around the streams. I've seen long-tailed weasels up there. As far as birds, you know, pretty much your whole mix of great horned owls and barred owls and screech owls and saw-whet owls, herons. I know about moose. We've had moose pass through the Bolton area. I don't know that there's been any sightings of moose in the Gay City area. A lot of deer up there. I know adjacent, there are people that have farms that open fields adjacent to Gay City, and I've set up my blind watch in the evening, and a lot of deer come out of Gay City to feed in the fields in the evening.
So I think I'm out of the territory of Gay City now, but I did find right here an antler to a deer, which is really interesting. I'm gonna take it with me. Down there, down this way, down that long path is where the pond was. This is going up to who knows where, but this is deer antler. Gonna take it with me. Looks like a nice artifact.
I haven't actually seen recent evidence of bears in that area. I have no doubt that they have passed through. We have here in town in Bolton, we have evidence of bears, and there have been occasional sightings in Bolton of bears passing through. I don't know as far as amphibians, as far as reptiles and so forth. I really haven't focused too much on them. I know there are vernal pools that are scattered around Gay City, and that would be now coming up on spring. There'll be spotted salamanders that will be migrating to the vernal pools to lay their eggs. Wood frogs, which when you're walking through, most people hear the peepers in the spring peepers. Vernal pools are about the only place you'll find wood frogs and spotted salamanders. Spotted salamanders, you don't hear them, but wood frogs will sound like ducks quacking.
And here we are, the geese at Gay City. Don't know if it's the same family, assuming it is, but you never know. It's winter, it's February 23rd. I wasn't sure if they'd be here, but turns out they're here. So, geese at Gay City.
We're seeing a lot more geese hanging around through the winter, and they're not always. Usually you think of geese, you see the V up in the sky and they're honking away and they're heading south for the winter, and then in the spring they come back. A lot of them do. The geese that we have here, some of them may have come from farther north, and then with climate change, Connecticut is milder than it has been. It's open water. From what I understand, there are some that are pretty much permanent residents in Connecticut. So that might be some of that. Years ago, you probably wouldn't have seen that. There's a variety of theories as to why that happened. As far as I'm concerned, it's all conjecture at this point, but we are seeing that more. We're seeing more resident geese, and that'd be, huge numbers, maybe out in the open water that you see around.
And there they go, marching into the water. They're swimming in the water, taking off at Gay City State Park. Here's the group of geese. I might have scared them away a little bit, but there they go into the water.
The DEP has volunteers in many, many different locations. I can't recall whether or not Gay City has been a location where they're actually tagging the geese. That's an ongoing project that happens every year. It has to happen when the geese, during their molt, when they can't fly. And then we can corral them into a pen and pull them out and determine the sex, and if they don't have a tag on, put a leg tag. Some of them, I'm sure, they might even have a neck collar. If you have binoculars, you might be able to see that. But a lot of them, I would imagine that there's probably a good number of them that have the leg.
Gay City State Park. have a group of geese here. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 altogether, geese family.
I mean, Gay City is, some of it laps into Bolton, but what I look at is I look at suitable habitat for wildlife, and that's not defined by political boundaries. Southwestern part of Bolton, some of that coincides with Gay City. Southwestern part of Bolton has a lot of relatively unfragmented contiguous forest, and then that overlaps into Gay City State Park, which also bumps up to Meshomassic State Forest, which also includes moorland, and which also includes Birch Mountain. The Manchester Water Department has about 1,000 acres of forest land up there. So we're talking about a huge, huge area. Like I say, relatively unfragmented, contiguous forest. So Gay City is kind of, I look at it as kind of the core region for a lot of these different species. Notice that particularly when I was filming deer down in the southwestern part of the town, there were deer coming out of the Gay City area to feed, and then they go back in there. So that provides a lot of cover for them, a lot of places to hide out, hang out. Even though they might find food sources in adjacent areas, that's still where they revert back to for the sake of feeling safe.
This, of course, is the other side of the pond. So we see the pond over here, and we see a little bit of water over here that's like a stream. Seems to be a common theme that streams connect to the ponds here. And the stream runs, I'm following its course right here. This is the stream, and you know, you wonder if the beavers actually made this, or if this was just by weather. I seem to think that it was made somehow by the beavers or people. I don't know that this would occur on its own, but you can hear the water. As I said, beavers are very much nocturnal. I looked up, so you're probably not going to see them during the day, but at least we got a good shot of the beaver dams and the trees that they were hacking at. It's always a good sign. And this is where it becomes kind of an issue, because we're at the end here, and the only way to go across is to cross the water, which I'm not equipped to do with a camera. But we'll take a look, and I'll see if there's any other ways. So I followed the path up through Gay City, kind of in the middle of nowhere here. We're outside of the park, over near Blackledge River, but it's interesting. It's like that in-between area. I guess we're in between the roads. This road doesn't look like it's been built yet. You can see the wires out there that the road is probably that way, civilization. We're not going to go that way. We're going to go back the way we came, but it's interesting to note that there's a trailer here. You got these big towers and a lot of land over here with just a dirt road. And this is the way we kind of came. We came down a trail over here that we're going to go back to. It connects to one of the trails. Goes down to the river. I was able to cross the river using a log. It was kind of difficult, but managed to make it work without getting myself too wet. It actually wasn't too bad. It was pretty easy. It was just the way to do it without getting wet. So in any case, we're going back this way, but I finally managed to get up past the river to see where we were.
Gay City is kind of special to us because of the cultural resources that are here. You know, most people come here with, enjoy the natural resources in terms of the, the woodlands and the trails that are available to them. But we're particularly interested in the people that were here, how this community started, and, the mills that were operating down by the Black Ledge River and the archaeological components of that history. Many people don't see it as they walk through the area, but kind of beneath their feet, underground, are some of the archaeological remnants of the Methodist community that was here. So that's where my interests lie, in the cultural aspects of this beautiful park.
According to many sources, the Sumners were the prominent family during Gay City's colonization, which is where the name Sumner Hollow comes from. Reverend Henry P. Sumner was the leader in religious affairs, and several sources claim the Sumners were involved in controlling the mills. However, the Gays would make an argument that they were the most prominent family, since Elijah Andrus had left the colony and appointed John Gay and his brother Ichabod to manage the colony's affairs. Some sources indicate that the Gays also had some involvement in controlling the mills. The park was formerly named Sumner Hollow, but was later renamed Gay City when Emma Foster ceded the park to the state in the 1940s with the hope and expectation that said property may be used for park purposes and for the preservation of the forest and wild animal life thereon. Many sources point to the Sumners as the prominent family, though whether it was the Sumners or the Gays, there seems to have been a battle for power, and both families were involved one way or another.
The Sumners were the big family here. Their original house stood right at the entrance of the park, where you first come in. A little high rise, again on the right, is where their house stood. That house was removed in the 1960s. Okay, we are still at the entrance of Gay City State Park, and as you enter the park and drive down the road, on the right you'll see a little hill, kind of a little small knoll. Up here is where Henry Sumner had his original house. If you can see the ground, and it's probably not going to come out in terms of the camera perspective, but you could actually see a subtle little kind of a rectangle in the lawn, and this is where the house stood. Back in the late 1970s, University of Connecticut came here and did some archaeological excavations, primarily in the back here. There was a barn back here, as well as other out structures. And again, the house was located at a very important crossroads in the town of Hebron, and connecting it with the Connecticut River in Glastonbury. So this stood a house. The house was removed in the 1960s.
We had done some hiking through the trails in Gay City, and at that time, this was back in the 60s, you could see some of the foundations of the older houses. I haven't been back since then to check.
Mm-hmm. But this was the last house standing?
Last house standing, and it was right facing, it didn't face Route 85, it faced the entrance to the park. You could see the side of the house as you drove by. After being so close to the house and driving by it so often, we had to admire the lines of the house. Our original intent was someday to replicate the house. My grandfather originally owned 130 acres here in Coventry, and when I was about 30, my parents deeded some property to me. And it was a spot I had always loved, so I couldn't imagine putting the house anywhere else. We looked into the possibility of having the house itself moved intact, but that proved to be too expensive. And so when we bought it from the state, we were tasked with dismantling it and bringing the pieces up to Coventry to reconstruct. We couldn't have done it without the help of probably every friend we ever knew. We were very fortunate. We just started by taking down the plaster and then looked at how we could dismantle everything and keep things intact. There were some things that were beyond saving, like the floorboards, but we just took wrecking bars and hammers and started taking it apart. Then the problem was where to store it until we could afford to start rebuilding. And it became scattered around through friends. Some of the larger pieces we brought up to the property and left out in the weather, thinking that we could start by building a foundation and getting the house reconstructed. It's quite similar. The biggest change we made was moving the pantry and the back door from the east side to the west side. Other than that, with the exception of adding 2 bathrooms, it's pretty much the same.
When you had gone to it, it was deserted, right?
Right, and the state owned it at that point in time. It was deeded to the state by the Foster sisters, I believe.
Before the park was ceded to the state, it was in the custody of the Foster sisters, Alice Foster and Emma Phelps Foster, who are referenced as part of the Gay family on the Hebron Historical Society website. Together, they lived in the Sumner House, which happened to be the last house standing on the Gay City property. It was anticipated that the house might become a museum, but instead, all of the objects were removed and have since disappeared over the years. Some of these objects have turned up, but many have been lost to history. Not much is known about the Foster sisters, though it is apparent that Emma Foster was a supporter of local music conservatories and the Children's Museum. Back in their estate in Hartford, the Foster sisters owned a lot of collectibles, including furniture which has been showcased in Furniture Treasury, an anthology composed by Wallace Nutting. Some of these objects may have made it into the Sumner House. Whether they did or not, it is apparent that the Foster sisters own many collectibles within their estates. So you said this is the
Keeping room.
keeping room. Okay. So is this technically like the kitchen? Behind? Okay. I'm just trying to get a feel for it.
There's a bake oven in that fireplace on the side. So I'm sure a lot of cooking was done there originally.
Very nice.
Well, I think we were very fortunate at that time to be able to do this. As I say, the rules and the regulations and the laws have changed so much that it couldn't happen again. But I'm glad we did it.
Well, I think historically, to me, you don't see the Sumner House anymore, but that area is still very historic. There's a lot going on here. This road that people enter into the park, they don't realize it, but that road went all the way to Glastonbury. And as a result of that, Glastonbury had a lot of shipbuilding activity. As you can see, we're at the entrance of Gay City State Park. We got Route 85 coming down here, but that's not the original position of the road. Back when this Methodist community was occupying here, the road actually went down to where people parked their cars here. It actually came along more in line with this fence here. Down here, in an open field, is once a schoolhouse. That's adjacent to the road. And this intersection off of the main road heading west was a major intersection. This road, even though it's used today as an entrance into the park, originally continued all the way to the Connecticut River in Glastonbury. And as a result of that, this was a main road down to get to Glastonbury. But a lot of the trees that were in this area that were lumbered and cut down actually were transported to the shipbuilding industry on the Connecticut River. So this was a hot spot, and the Sumner House stood right here. The Sumner House stood right here on the knoll, right at the entrance of Gay City State Park.
Lorenzo Dow was a well-known preacher throughout Connecticut. He was born in Coventry and traveled throughout Hebron. He He was known for being very eccentric. Lorenzo Dow taught at the District 10 white schoolhouse where the children within Gay City attended. Some of the students also attended school at the District 11 schoolhouse known as Pepperidge Farm.
You know, my thoughts about the place are, you know, for people that come here and enjoy Gay City. It's a beautiful property. And again, I think people, when they come here, they think of the recreational and they think of the natural beauty that's here within this forested environment. But what I would like is people to also recognize and appreciate the cultural history that's here, because it's really quite wonderful. And you could still see the remnants of it in terms of the archaeological components. So when they enjoy the park, hopefully they enjoy also an understanding of the history that was here.
Phyllis Redford wrote an article for Yankee magazine, and I think it's very important to remember that this area in Hebron was called Factory Hollow. There was a great deal of manufacturing going on there and many mills. And I believe it started to decline around the time of the Revolutionary War.
Back in the 1800s, people with a minimum education were able to go out, construct the dam, harness the river, and then use the water in the river to power mills. And this has always intrigued me, and retiring has given me an opportunity to undertake these studies. A lot of the work that I do is summarized in a series of books, and it's part of my Lost Mill Site series. And I'm doing one for each town in the Tolland County area.
You got the river over there, and there probably was a spill that allowed it to go through. They constructed their dam that probably came right across here. Again, this has all been kind of redesigned. And over here, on this side, there would have been a gate. And the gate would have allowed water to come into this trough. You see this over here? It looks like that depression that goes all the way down with the trail running on the berm. Well, that was the head race. That is to say, water was released and sent down here to get to the mill. It might have had a wooden trough in there. We don't know that. But it would have been kind of a gravity fed from up here down and getting to the mill. Really quite well constructed. So where this path is, where we're walking, this is all man-made. This is built up. Originally that slope would have gone all the way down to the river. So this channel was created by taking the soil, building it up here to create a sluice. And that's the head race that would eventually lead us down to the mill.
Most people will say there's this mill building, and it may be part of a complex, or it may be an individual mill. I try and study the complex of mills as related to a single water supply source. So within that framework, there would be two mill sites in Gay City State Park. The first would be the Factory Hollow mill site, which is a big one. And then a smaller one was called the Charles Sumner Paper Mill. And they're within about 650 feet apart. Now, if you study the history behind Gay City, you'll also see reference to a sawmill and perhaps some other mills, depending on what source you're looking at. The sawmill, I believe, was not part of the complex at the factory mill site, but it may have been upstream where the water supply comes from for the factory mill site. So that would be included with the factory mill site, even though it's a little bit more remote from the location of the ruins.
What we also see, because of the industry, is a rearrangement of the land, a landscaping that's historical. So the pond that everybody swims in today and uses for recreational purpose, well, that was a mill pond. That was purposely dammed for water to turn the mill wheels with water-powered industry that created the prosperous industry that was here for a while, for a couple of generations. And that water power was kind of interesting. The earliest mills we have here, when they first came and settled this area, actually straddled the river, the Black Ledge River, and those got wiped out because of storms. And so later what they did is they channeled the water around, away from the river to the mill, and then eventually discharging back into the mill through the tail race. So you could see the history of water-powered industry here. It's a very neat place for that, because you could see the changes in the approach to water power and bigger mills. The paper mill is a fairly large mill that's you could still see the ruins of.
I have a pretty good idea where these mills are when I start out. But when we get down there, we trace the race, the head race that I talked about, to the mill. And we looked at the mill, we measured it, determined how it functioned, probably where each function was within the mill site, and kind of got a feel for how it operated. I think the thing that struck us most was the fact that you could not see the source of the water supply. Gay City now has a recreation pond. That is not the pond where the water supply came from. The race actually went through the pond up to, I think it was called Still Pond. It was up towards the head of the pond. And right there was a little dam, and then the water was sent to the mill down through that race. So it wasn't directly on the river. It's what we call an off-stream mill.
You know, New England, this is where the Industrial Revolution took off here. It was all based on water energy and what it could create. And that, you know, went in, you know, through the 19th century to the time of really electricity, and then they had a different way of getting energy. But water was a marvelous source. Boy, you could really see the depth of this thing now, huh?
Yeah.
That really held a lot of water coming through. And of course, with the pond and the dam, they could regulate that water.
So,
you know,
so they basically channeled it out in a different direction?
channeled it out. There's the river below us. But they channeled it. That's exactly right. It was a lot safer. And of course, it took some industry. This takes, you know, this is quite something. Which means that the mill itself must have been pretty prosperous. You know, you're going to do this when you have an economically viable business.
Well, there's a very interesting thing there. To make a mill work, you need what's called head or fall. And that simply means that you have a high point and a low point, and the water falling creates power. The factory hollow mill was very unusual, that it was several thousand feet long. In front of the mill, they had what's called a head race. And the head race was tapped into the Blackledge River, somewhere above where the current pond is. And then water came down through that head race to the factory mill site. And that was a good site. It was a good water supply source. It provided adequate head, and it was about a 10 to 12 foot head when it reached the mill. And that's more than adequate to power a mill, especially if you have water volume behind it.
Again, you could see another berm here. Now, there might have been a structure down in here. When you look at that face, there might have been now what they could have done, if this in fact was a structure with a wheel right here, they could divert the water from here underneath and spill over. I really don't know. You can see it's all beautifully cut stone. See how that edge is there? That's beautifully feathered. So deliberately stacked, more than just a support, you know, a supporting wall. So, but I don't know. I don't know what's down there. We've never explored that area, but that could have been one of a series of mills that went all the way down.
The first one is the factory mill site. That's the large site if you've been down there. That site was primarily the woolen site, and that's what it's known for. The paper mill site was about 650 feet downstream, and it was kind of an unusual site in that the building was built over the river, so that the water supply utilized there was under the river. From what I can gather, it was a very small mill, and it only had a few years of operation before it burned.
So the first thing you notice when you look at the ruins, you start right about here and go all the way down. This is a very long mill. It's rectangular and highly so. And that's really because the machinery to make paper they needed was long. So the mill, outside of the mill structure, really helps us, it's really predicated, I should say, on the nature of the machinery that was in here. So it's a long building. And you've got, this is really cool here. So here comes the sluice. You can see it really clearly here. It's coming in, the water's coming way back from the pond, coming down into here, and it's being turned here. This would have been the wheel pit.
Well, the first mill, as I had said before, or the second mill, Charles Sumner Mill, paper mill, that was Charles Sumner. The other mill had two principal owners. One was a Sumner, and the other one was a fellow by the name of Strong. There probably were other mill owners there throughout history, but these are the two that I had found.
So the huge water wheel would have sat here. The water was probably an overshot, so it came in and hit the top of the wheel and turned it. And that would turn the gears that would be attached to more gears and belts and operate the machinery through this whole long area. Really, really cool.
The woolen mill was around 1810, and the other mill was around 1870, and it burned around 1879. So it was all in that time period when Factory Hollow was active. The mills perhaps is what supported Factory Hollow. So when the paper mill burned and they had a fire in the woolen mill and that burned, that pretty much did the Gay City area in.
Now, what we see today is really the stone foundations, and again, a very clear wheel pit. That would have been the tail race there that goes back into the river, discharges the water that has been brought around. Meanwhile, the energy is really coming fast. Mm-hmm. You don't find much metal here. You know, evidences of the wheel, and machinery. And that's because basically, even though these places went out of business, and we know this place burnt, during the scrap metal drives of World War II and World War I, when we were looking for metal to process into, war material, people used to go to these old mills and they strip all the metal and sell them to the federal government. So you rarely ever see any wheels left. You rarely ever see any metal, though sometimes you do. But much of that did not survive the metal drives of the two world wars. But you got the stone ruins, which are really fabulous.
Operations of the mill and the mill history itself were very difficult to decipher. By way of example, I've seen reports that there was one fire at the woolen mill or Factory Hollow mill. I've seen reports that there might have been 2 fires. I've seen reports that there might have been 3 fires. The fires have occurred on different dates and lend some confusion to the overall history, because we do know that when the mills were gone, essentially Gay City stopped being a community. They had nothing to support the community. So what I oftentimes find is that there are some conflicts between what the site is telling me on one hand and what the history is telling me on the other hand. And I've never been able to figure that out.
Now, one of the ways they made paper is they took from shoddy mills. They took old rags, clothing, old rag clothing, and reprocessed it. And many, many years ago, and I probably won't see it today, but out in that area, there used to be deposits of a lot of buttons. Mm-hmm. And the buttons were from old rags, shirts, that they would strip off the buttons and then process the rags for paper making. And there was a little dump here that had all of that material in it.
And people used to think it was like a button mill, I heard, but it was really
right.
Paper mill.
It was really a paper mill, and the buttons were the results of the rags that they were doing. A whole series of different kind of buttons that would have been used. And these are kind of milk glass buttons. Mm-hmm. This one's got a nice little decoration on it. You see it right there? Mm-hmm. There's a nice little kind of rim to it. This one is a wooden button, And those are rare. You don't find too many of those. Those are glass.
And these were on the shirts, right? The shirts.
That's right.
That they used at the paper mill.
Most likely. That's
Okay.
right. That's right.
And people think that it was a clothing mill because of the buttons, but it was really a paper mill.
The buttons that would be found around the mill would definitely have been used. They took old shirts and rags and they processed them into paper. So those shirts are raggedy and gone, and many of them have been used in terms of the actual mill operation. But what you get left are the buttons, and so there are a number of buttons. In this case, we got a brass button right here, and I'm not quite sure what this button is, but it's got it looks like a glass button with kind of like a metal rim around it. Can you see that? Can you make that out? Can you make that rim out?
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. I don't know much about that one, but I thought I saw here a shell button too. And we see them made out of bone, shell. Well, here's a bone button. Okay, so you've got two buttons here. You got a glass button, and this one's made out of bone.
Wow.
So they made They used to make buttons out of a lot of material. And so in this collection, you got glass, bone, wood, shell, and brass.
Wow.
Making up buttons. So that kind of diversity of buttons suggests more of a processing, and probably association with the mill operation. The other thing that's interesting here is you can see this cut stone, and you see these drill marks. These were made with star drills. Bam! And they would place them along, and of course what they would do is the pressure of it would crack. These are classic 19th century, mid-19th century star drills. The earliest to cut stone were kind of wedge-shaped, okay? Kind of triangular, but wedge-shaped. And what they would do is they would pound that out, make the hole, stick wood in there, a piece of wood in there, and then soak the wood, get it wet. And when the wood gets wet, it expands. And you do a series of that, and that expansion would crack the stone. Okay, but this is later. You can see the star drill very nicely arranged here, periodically every 6, 7 inches, if not a little bit more, and enough of them to cut and split the stone. But that's you could see that's mid-19th century. Basically, we call this place Gay City, but the Gays were not a very prominent family here. They were one of many families here. It was just stipulated when the property was given to the state of Connecticut that it would be called Gay City. However, the founding people here in the late 18th and early 19th century were basically a Methodist. They were a Methodist community. At that time, there was a great deal of competition between some of the Protestant sects, and the Congregationalists were, embedded in the town center. So the Methodists coming in kind of were upstarts, if you will, and they were, divorced from the center of town, and they were out here in kind of more of a wilderness area of the community. Also, the Methodists were very much involved in the Industrial Revolution. If you could think of the Congregationalists were basically farmers and so forth, and merchants. It was the Methodists that were really industrialists. And so the Blackledge River was a major source of water-powered industry for them. And some of the mills are still, you can still visit them today on the walks.
I'd like to go back and just speak generally about people who would like to see a mill. This is on a piece of property that's owned by the state of Connecticut. It's owned by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And as such, you can walk all over the mill sites. You can go there without having to get permission from a landowner. And I think it's a good opportunity for anyone that would like to see what an old mill site looks like to take a look at that one. The other mill site down below it, the old paper mill site, that's a little bit more difficult to find. And the easiest way to find it is go about 650 feet, look to your right as you're going downstream, and you'll see what looks like an old dam. And if you carefully evaluate that, you can see where the foundation was around that dam.
then we'll come down here. You get a nice view of the mill from down here and the foundations coming back. Kind of Hebron's version of Machu Picchu. You know? So this is the area where we found buttons. And again, there wasn't a button factory here. It's from the rags that were used. So you got this huge mill here, this huge paper mill that was really quite well. Now down below, probably won't go that far, but down below over here was the remnant of a sawmill that actually straddled the river. That's to say the mill actually stood with pillars on both sides of the river, and the water coming underneath would turn the wheel, okay? So it was an undershot wheel. Why that was strategically located there is because of the terrain of the land. What they did is usually sawmills operated usually in the late winter, early spring, when there was still ice and snow on the ground. And what that did is, you can imagine this whole way clear. There was a roadway up on top of the hill. When they got parallel to the mill, they would unload the wood and roll it. Use the nature of the land, use the topography of the land, and roll it down to the mill. It was a lot more efficient back then when you're dealing with hydraulics. So it was situated there specifically because of the slope and be able to roll the logs down. Unfortunately, because it straddled the river, it was destroyed because of a big storm that came through and it just blew everything out. So really precarious. And that's when we see in New England, they start to redesign and channel the water away. It's a lot safer, and they can control the water much better. And especially when a number of mills were located on the same stream, water had to be shared. It's kind of like if you had to share your electricity with somebody else, and you only had it for maybe an hour, and they had it for an hour, and you had to alternate. So they could regulate a little bit better the flow of water, and also what time of the year the water was needed. So a lot of the changes in industry here, and we see that with this complex. And again, look at that long, narrow mill. Again, because of the nature of the machinery, that's how they had to construct it.
Awesome.
And again, there's the river right here below us, and the water would have come off that face, shot over the wheel, and the wheel would have sat somewhere in here, and then the water would have discharged and go right back into the river.
So what exactly was in the hole right there?
The wheel.
The wheel. So the wheel was actually in that hole.
That's exactly right. That's called a wheel pit.
Okay.
That's where the wheel would have sat. And of course, as it turned gears that would turn other gears and belts and so forth that would operate the machinery. Very efficient. I mean, it really worked well. It's amazing how much energy water has. So the water would come up there from what we would call the back of the mill, and then probably with a wooden trough pitched down, so it generates flow and it generates energy as it's coming, and it doesn't take much to get that, and then that energy would turn the wheels, and that would operate the whole mill. Think of Niagara Falls. Above Niagara, it's flat and almost serene, peaceful water. But as soon as it hits that edge, it starts roaring, and the amount of energy that's created is extraordinary. This was obviously no Niagara, but the same concept on a smaller scale. Didn't take much of a pitch, and you had a lot of energy. It was very efficient for, until we start having, combustible engines and electricity. This was how the Industrial Revolution started here. And Connecticut and Hebron, part of that, was a very effective place for that because we had these water sources that drained down, and we had plenty of water, plenty of topography. The need for grist mills and sawmills and eventually paper mills really takes over. And this was a great source of energy. New England is obviously where the Industrial Revolution starts here. My research was limited. The research, the archaeological research that was done here was headed by a historic archaeologist by the name of Robert Grady III. He really did the work. We came out and visited, and the University of Connecticut, through the Connecticut State Museum of Natural History and Archaeology Center, houses the artifacts that were excavated here, and because it's state property. These look like they might be 18th century, or When was Gay City settled?
I think it was like
in the late 1800s.
1797.
Yeah.
They first went there.
So these are about that. These would be maybe even earlier.
And you said they're from England.
Yeah, I call it kaolin. Kaolin.
Okay. And they smoked them. You said.
And this was a smoking pipe.
Okay.
These pipes were the long ones with a little bowl. You ever see the pictures of George Washington and the boys hanging around? These are the kind of pipes.
Oh wow.
And they would be they'd vary, in size and length, but they usually were pretty good size, pretty good length. The stems would break quite frequently. In these cases, the bowls are very thin, the pipe bowl, and they all cracked. So my work here is basically based off of that initial research. So, and of course, as the state archaeologist having responsibility for state land and the archaeological sites of it, I got to know Gay City quite early, and as a result, we became very fascinated by it and what was still here that we could learn from. So, that interest was spurred because of the archaeological work that was done here in the late 70s. That would be straight, obviously. I would think, unless it was designed that way. But it's a door hinge. And this was found on the surface near the Sumner House, which is out on the corner by Route 85 and the entrance of Gay City.
But it was part of the Porterhouse?
Yeah. No, this would have been this one itself would have been probably part of the Sumner House.
Okay.
Okay, the rest of these items were excavated from the Porterhouse.
Okay.
But that's... I don't know enough about these hinges, whether that is warped or whether that actually was the way it was designed. Pretty neat, though.
Yeah.
And of course, the Porters were with the Sumners. In fact, I think we have one of the house ruins in the park of one of the Porter family's members. But that's right, the Porter families and the Sumners were very, very, they're the ones that really owned the mills and operated the mills together. It's kind of a little dirty. But here's one of the things we look for on the stoneware, and that has to do with the quality. Basically what happened was most of the good quality clay that was used for stoneware comes from Amboy, New Jersey. Amboy is it's a very white clay, and it really holds together well. It's expensive, but what potters in Connecticut would do is they would bring up quantities of the clay from Amboy and mix it with local clay. Kind of cheapens it up, but it makes the clay last longer. You got more clay to work with. So one of the ways we look at that is when the inside is broken, okay, like this, it's snapped, you get to look at the inside. You see that little shade of red? Can you make that out? A little bit of more red than over here. It's a little grayer.
Yeah.
So that means this pot was probably mixed with kind of a reddish clay, which is more local. On the other hand, you got some nice gray in here too. So this is mostly Amboy with a mixture, probably a mixture of some local clay. And of course, these kind of jugs, stoneware, could have been used for storage of material as well as, liquids, that they would have poured and so forth. But it's pretty good quality clay, actually. Not the cheapest form. Here is an old bottle. Would have probably been about that time period, early 19th century. And you can see the swirls that they made in terms of how a cork would fit in here, the rim, the neck. Guys that are really good in bottles, they can really date these things almost within a decade.
Wow.
So one of the things we look for is a seam. And the seam suggests that it's later because of the technology change. But this one has no seam to it. This would have been part of an early, like a wine bottle or something like that. So that's kind of a neat one. That's an early one. That might even go near, the date of the founding of, the Sumner House. These larger items came from the Sumner House.
Okay.
Where the smaller ones we showed you were all from the excavations at the Porterhouse.
So all three of these were from the Sumner House?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Well, the four of them were the two fractures.
Oh, okay. That's right. There were two different...
But the rest of these were from the Porterhouse. The Sumner House was a classic kind of like a colonial salt box, if you will. It was a center stack with rooms around it. And yet when you cross the river on more of the western side of the park, you could see ruins where they're 19th century and people have access to wood burning stoves. What that means is you don't need a center stack anymore where the fireplaces were all around. You basically get more efficient heat from the wood burning stove, and you go over there and you don't see any fireplaces and you wonder, how do they heat? Well, they heated through wood into stoves that not only they use for cooking but also used for heating the houses. So you see a change in architecture from the late 18th century into the 19th century in the development of wood burning stoves. So, you know, when you look at this place, there's a lot of history here, and there's a lot of changing history. And the Sumner families and others were very much involved with that. And that's what kind of makes this a very cool place for archaeologists and historians. Again, UConn came here and did excavations in the 1970s. The artifacts of that excavation process are at the University of Connecticut and housed there for researchers and to maintain the history. What was recovered was basically, you know, broken pieces of glass and ceramics and nails, nothing really exciting. But to an archaeologist, that's important because the nature of those ceramics tell us about marketplaces that the people were tied into, the socioeconomics that they had available to them, and a lot of other aspects of the community that we don't necessarily get through historic documents. So it becomes an important place historically. You only see a lawn, but to the archaeologists in our minds, we see the house and the farm components that were once a part of this.
These are plates, bowls, crocks. This is kind of neat. We should probably take this one out for you and lay it on the thing because this has got the maker's mark. Okay, this would have been a bowl, and you probably have parts of the fragment here. I don't know if it. No, this is more. Yeah, this is. Oh no, it's a different plate entirely. But you see the maker's mark here? Ironstone, I. Davis. Now that's from England, but what we could do with that now is we could trace that and actually determine, you know, find out when this particular vessel was made. We can also tell about, is it an expensive item? Is it a cheaper item? This looks pretty good actually, and you can see the rim. So this would have been like a small bowl, about like this, and there's the base of it. And so maker's marks are important to us because they allow us to trace back the actual manufacturer, and as a result, we can do some more research on it. So clearly they're importing things from England, which also suggests some prosperity within the family.
There's a cemetery on the main road first coming into the park. It's on the left as you enter, and it's a very small cemetery. The issue there we have archaeologically is that the stones have been moved. Some of them anyhow. It's hard to determine exactly which ones were. And a stone wall was built around it. And that was probably built when the park was developed, just to close off the stones. The stones may have been brought into that enclosure. It's really hard to say exactly how the park moved things around. We know that because when you look at the two lines of tombstones that are there, there's footstones aligned with headstones, which means that instead of being in their appropriate position behind the individual, they're in line. And we also know that when you look at old cemeteries here in this area of eastern Connecticut during this time period, the writing is usually on the west side of the tombstone, and the individual is laying behind it with the feet moving east. So the idea is as you lay in the ground, you lay with your head to the west, your feet to the east, and you lie there in preparation for the day of resurrection when Christ will come up with the sun out of the east and literally draw you from your housing. And also it's designed that way so when you go to commemorate someone at the burial ground, you don't step on their grave, okay? So when you look at some of the stones to the west side, they have been moved and rotated to face the east. Cosmetically, it's been improved, and we could see that and understand that as archaeologists. Here we are at Gay City State Park and the small little family cemetery that started here. Mostly associated with the Sumners, but there are other families also here. First of all, the thing that strikes me as an archaeologist is
and having worked in cemeteries in New England, that the stones have probably been moved around. And what I think is going on here too is this probably stone wall was put here when they developed the park as opposed to having originally been here. And the layout of the graves may or may not be in their original positions. Basically, the way the old cemeteries here in New England are situated is the headstone is to the west of the grave and the feet or footstone is to the east. So where we are now, we are facing the east, and the idea is the head would be behind the tombstone with the feet moving away. The idea is you laid in the ground in preparation for the day of resurrection, where Christ would come up out of the sun and literally draw you from your housing. So you laid there. And so that means the description is on the back side, okay? The person's not laying here, the person's laying here. And as a result of that, as you read the tombstone, you're not stepping on the grave. That's why it was designed that way. Many people think that they're buried in front of the tombstone. In those historic, they never did that. The reason we think things have been moved around is this particular stone, this is not a headstone, that's called a footstone. That should have been behind the individual. So you had a headstone with the epitaph and all the writing on it, and a small footstone indicating the foot of the grave, with usually just the initials. So this is not in its position, this has been moved. And the same here. So whether these are right or not, it's hard for us to say. When you look over here, you have just the opposite. The writing is on this side, which means probably this has been moved. They've been rotated. Whether they're in their original spots or not, we do not know. I think they were rotated because you come in the entrance of the cemetery and you could read. But that's not the way it was originally laid out, would have been laid out. So a lot of changes here. Also, my assumption is the stone wall was built with the park, and that means there could be other graves around that are not inside the stone. Many people did not, many families couldn't afford tombstones. People would have gotten wooden crosses or sometimes just small field stones as markers or no markers at all. So we don't really know where all the graves are. This shows 6 tombstones, actually 5 with 1 footstone. But whether there are more in here or whether there's a wider range of burials around, we really have no information on. But all we could see is the stones that are in fact here.
This starts as a Methodist community. Their interests are very much in farming, but mostly industry, and separate from the rest of the Hebron community. And as a result of that, they were considered wild. There were crazy dances and things that went on here. And there's a lot of legends associated with the Methodists here. But really what it comes down to is a community of people to be able to do their religious activities as well as their economic activities and political activities. So they became pretty prominent in the 19th century. The mills really did well, and until the paper mill burnt down later on in the 1880s, it was a pretty prosperous community. And then after that, with the mill going out, it becomes more abandoned. People start going elsewhere, and eventually it would be given to the state of Connecticut as this beautiful park.
Gay City's past is filled with unusual legends and stories. Hans de Pold of the Bolton Historical Society mentions that Elijah Andrus had left the colony within 4 years of its founding, deserting his followers and leaving them to years of feuding and fighting. Alcohol had been a significant factor, as it was claimed to be used during several religious meetings, but had done little to bring peace and tranquility. Soon, drunken brawls and blasphemous language erupted among various families, which led to some very unfortunate events within the colony. But it wasn't just disagreements and brawls among families. There were some very odd activities taking place between a religious preacher and the community jester. Various sources claim there was a man named Loomer who had a fun-making talent of mimicking others. Loomer took it upon himself to impersonate a circuit rider preacher named Reverend Colton. Reverend Colton then went in disguise to see Loomer's impersonation of himself, and even went as far as challenging Loomer to see who the better impersonator could be. One of the legends regarded laborers working on the construction of the woolen mill. According to a traditional story, one of the workers refused to build a canal because he had witnessed water running uphill and proclaimed it was the work of the devil. He immediately dropped his shovel, walked off the job site, and never returned.
What Gay City is now today to us is it's like a ghost town. That is to say, it's abandoned. There are ruins here of the houses and the mills that people occupied, even their cemetery. And while the people are not here anymore, people refer to this as kind of a ghost town. And of course, what we see then is legends developing about ghosts and so forth. I have no information about that. Basically, we deal with material culture and the scientific point of view with archaeology. But you can see where that arises because of the fact that there are ruins here. And the history of the Methodist community that was here is somewhat known. And so people associate that it's still, the ghosts are still here.
Okay, Gay City State Park. This is what it looks like at night. We're probably not supposed to be in here right now, but hey, it's all fair game. So we're going to see if we see any of what they say is ghosts or whatever we see here. So come on, let's go.
You can get the fireflies.
Huh?
You can get the fireflies.
Yeah, I know. It come out good.
What if you can get the lake?
So I could probably
It's kind of fuzzy right now.
narrate one of the ghosts that we're trying to find here for the people listening. Is that they say there's a kid who got his head chopped off, and he runs around carrying his head in his hands. He was late to work, and he's a blacksmith's assistant, and the blacksmith didn't like that he was late to work, so he chopped his head off. Whether people believe the ghost is here or not, that's the rumor. The society before it fell apart was a lot of the people drank a lot. So there's a lot of weird things that happen with that. While there are legends and stories of gruesome murders that took place at Gay City State Park in the past, many believe that there is still ghostly spirits and paranormal activity taking place there today. Several ghost hunting teams have set out and tested the park to find unusual and unexplained activity taking place. One of the ghost hunters, Lauren Middleton of Pioneer Valley Paranormal, formerly Lauren Neslucin of Quiet Corner Paranormal, has investigated the haunted activity at Gay City State Park. Thomas D. Agostino, author of Abandoned Villages and Ghost Towns of New England, credits Lauren as a top-notch investigator whose rational and professional demeanor towards paranormal makes her accounts very credible. Next, you will hear from Lauren herself about her investigations at Gay City State Park and be able to determine whether the park is truly haunted or not.
I was actually working for a website called The Examiner, and I wanted to kind of back up the claims of the research I had done for the park through Dam, Connecticut. So it was very close to me. I lived in Woodstock, Connecticut at the time, so it was only a 45-minute ride, so I figured, you know, what the heck, it's a nice walk in the woods.
This is the mill site right here. I don't know specifically, but I think there's more. This is the one that I know about.
I think this is the main area. This is where we had the weird stuff happen. Our name is Pioneer Valley Paranormal. We're based out of Western Mass. I'm from Connecticut, but most of the gentlemen that I investigate with are from Ware, Massachusetts. We have Ben Ring, who's the lead investigator, Anthony, who does our camera work, and we have Tim Aldrich, who is also an investigator. We also have Sam Leviticus, but he's actually on hiatus right now out in Utah. My history with Gay City is a while ago I used to run another group called Quiet Corner Paranormal, and we came here to investigate quite a few times due to some claims we had found on a website called Dam, Connecticut. We came and we brought voice recorders and K2 meters and cameras, and we actually get some very interesting things. And now I'm in a group called Pioneer Valley Paranormal, and they're actually here with me today. We might do some investigating later.
That's cool.
It's got a ruin down here too, right? That's like a cellar wall?
Yeah.
Yeah, right around here.
Where's the boy's name?
I don't know. I know where he's buried, but I don't know his name. So I
I
don't.
didn't know he got his head chopped off. So that's a very angry boy.
Yeah, well, it was the blacksmith who did it, and apparently he wasn't punished for doing it either. There's no punishment involved, but I don't know the kid's name. I know he's buried at Gilead Cemetery. I tried looking there, but if you don't know the name, you can't really find it. Thought I heard stuff. That's just the water.
Surprised we haven't seen a bear.
That sounds like something moving.
I don't know why I can't get this flash work on the camera.
That sounds like water, but it sounds like something moving too.
We always debunk our evidence. We try to always search for a natural explanation before we say it's paranormal. I don't think there's any way that people can really say ghosts exist other than something completely appearing right in front of you. But we've had that happen before. Usually we kind of brush off noises and, smells and things as something that could be explained naturally. There's been a few things we've seen with our eyes that we definitely think is paranormal in nature.
I'm guessing those like read the voices or anything?
Yeah, this one does voices. That does thermal imaging. Then we have all our electricity meters and audio stuff in there.
Being a Christian, you read the Bible, and the Bible itself talks about spirits and demons and all sorts of things on another plane of existence that we don't always see. And so, yes, I'm totally open-minded to there being spirits at Gay City, but perhaps not in the traditional sense like the horror movies have scary ghosts and poltergeists. Perhaps not like that, because I haven't seen it. But there definitely is an uncomfortable feeling at the place. There is like the air itself is holding its breath and waiting for something. I don't know what that something is. I would say that I've even talked to other people that feel like they've seen ghosts there. A lot of people say they see spirits. So yeah, it's possible they could be there, and especially if perhaps a person isn't laid to rest. Perhaps there's a waiting period. I don't really know the answers to these questions, but I am open-minded to there being something like that.
You say there's another ghost too, a jewelry peddler. His body was thrown into a charcoal pit, and again, no one was punished for it. But, don't know.
His body was thrown in the what?
Huh?
His body was thrown in the what?
Charcoal pit?
Wait, there's a lot of sounds around here.
Yeah, I know.
I think our imagination's kicking in.
I keep on hearing it. It's like I go to this side, I hear something on the other side.
It could be the fireworks. Now the fireworks is bouncing off everything in here.
Yeah, but it sounds a little bit more than that.
I do know a little bit about the history of the legends. Some of the settlers died of natural causes, but there was also a lot of murders that supposedly took place that were not brought to justice, including one of interest to me. There was a blacksmith that worked very close to the mill, if not on the site of the mill, and he killed his apprentice upon showing up late to work. I've heard some variations of the story that perhaps he was sleeping with the blacksmith's wife, and that was the real reason behind the murder, not just showing up late. But I've heard that also travelers that traded with the area, one of them was beheaded and burnt in a charcoal pit, and the body, the perpetrator, was never found. So there's a variety of myths and legends. I've also heard just local ones, person to person, that they've gone through the woods and seen covens of real witches there who have been like kind of in the middle of ceremonies and practices around an old chimney to the left inside of the park, and which has disturbed some people. And so there's a wide variety. Who knows how true some of them are, but there seems to be some historic value that at least there have been some murders passed in the day.
Going towards the chimney hole over here, yesterday it was really sunny. We couldn't find it. Couldn't find it for the life of us, and now a couple minutes in we found it. Coming up here to see if there really is any witch gatherings or whatnot over here. Whatever you want to make of it, it's right up here, closing in on it, and we're gonna investigate it a little further this time. It's a lot harder to find in the summer than it is in the fall, I say, just because all the green trees and everything. But it's right here. It's become kind of a legend here, so we're gonna take a look and investigate. And there's a lot of ferns in front of it. Again, you don't get that in fall, but they're here now. Looks like an old soda can's there. It's a little bit broken. See if there's anything on the other side. No, just stone. Nice stone tower up at the top. You see a little tarp. It's attached to it. That's about it. A piece of stone here. I wonder if you can move that. Yeah, it just falls down. One of the legends is about a jewelry peddler who was murdered and robbed for his money before being left to die in a charcoal pit. His sudden disappearance brought suspicion until his remains were found in a charcoal pit on the edge of the village. Many say the ghost of the jewelry peddler still haunts the park today in search of his murderer who was never brought to justice. A second murder took place when an angry blacksmith slashed his teenage assistant with a butcher knife after he arrived late to work. Legend has it that the boy haunts the woods, running hurriedly to work on time while carrying his head in his hands. Like the jewelry peddler, there is no record of this murder being brought justice either.
Yeah, it looks like an old bowl. Yeah.
Anybody want to communicate with us? We have a device here you can communicate through. No need to be afraid. It's not going to hurt you. You just come up and speak into this device. What is your name?
We usually show it to each investigator and try to validate. You know, if it's a voice recording, you know, we'll say, were you in this room at the time? And we'll validate it with the entire team to make sure it wasn't something they said or that got accidentally recorded. We use the same type of equipment on each investigation, so we can actually, if we catch something on a camera that we didn't catch on another camera of the same shot, we usually say it's probably paranormal in nature. Or if some person get a recording of a voice on one recorder in the same room, that's probably paranormal in nature as well if the other person did not catch it.
Is there anybody here? Just speak through this device if you want to communicate with us. How many of you are here? Can you tell us your name?
Where are we going next? Walk along the wall?
Sure.
Is there anybody here that wants to communicate with us?
I don't know if you saw those.
Oh yeah, over by that lake, right? Isn't there? There's a dam over there. Oh, I know
Yeah.
what you're talking about. You're talking about over there.
Yeah.
But there's like another lake over there.
I don't know how to get there. I've been there a couple times, but...
What was that like?
Oh, that was...
I got it.
Fell out of my pocket, I think.
Yeah.
Didn't even feel it. I bet you the ghost knocked it down. Just kidding. But I didn't feel it at all.
I have to show you this picture one time I took 1,000 pictures of I need a new camera of a fire. We were sitting around a campfire, and I got a picture of a face.
Oh wow.
I'll have to. It's in the. I have to show you.
But seriously though, I didn't even feel that come out of my pocket
Right.
at all.
We came here, it was in the middle of winter. There wasn't a lot of people around, but just the variety of things that happened during the day were quite amazing. We saw black mists, we heard footsteps crunching in the snow, there were things being thrown at us from the woods, and it was deserted that day.
The creepiest time to be in the park is like late afternoon, like right when the sun is setting a little bit, like 5 or 6 in the afternoon in the fall. That's like the weirdest time. I've been walking through the trails and I've heard kids laughing, children laughing, and gone around the trail and nobody's there. Like I thought people would be there walking ahead of me and there was nobody there. And it's just like a creepy feeling. I've been concerned about bears as well. There's been a lot of bear sightings at Gay City State Park and actually one moose sighting. So I'm always on alert for wild animals that could be dangerous. And I've heard animals that I don't know what they are, like loud screeching noises of, I thought some sort of bird. It was not a hawk. It wasn't a turkey. It wasn't a vulture. So I know that it's not those things. I've heard some really weird screeching noises. I get this feeling like something's behind me and I keep looking behind me and I don't see anything. And I hate walking alone because then, you're extra on alert picking up on these things.
Sun's still out even though it's, 6 in the evening on this fine June day of 2017. Too much brush here.
Right there.
What's up there? The moon?
Yeah. To the trees.
Whoa. There's a bird there. See that?
Oh, there's something there, huh?
Something's going down the tree.
Yeah.
Right over here.
Chipmunk?
It's on the other side.
I'm trying to get it, but he's moving too fast.
Probably just a squirrel.
Baby squirrel or chipmunk. It's pretty small. I heard something over here.
It's even buggier down here though.
Yeah, it is with the... It's because of the water.
I didn't expect to see the black mists that I saw, and I didn't hear anything about seeing black mists in the stories I had read beforehand. It was so clear to me that I didn't think I was actually seeing anything paranormal. I kind of looked at it and looked away and realized, wow, I think I just saw something, but it was gone in a blink of an eye.
Power down. Oops, changed it. Oxy mode.
So is he talking to you here?
No, nothing.
So I actually found something that might have been of historical value at Gay City. I mentioned before that sometimes I would go metal detecting and find like old tin cans and boot buckles, little eyelets for homemade coats and whatnot. But the most interesting find I ever found at Gay City would be human remains, which isn't your normal run-of-the-mill everyday find, but it was the manner in which I found them that I thought was pretty extraordinary. So the way that I found these bones was actually the most interesting part of what I think the whole story is. I actually had a series of 2 very intense dreams about this particular tree at Gay City. And I don't normally dream about particular places. Normally, the only times I dream about particular places is like my home from my childhood. So this was kind of already a strange dream to have. So the first dream I had, it was nighttime, and I had parked all the way at the entrance of the park, and it was getting dark. I was trying to get to my car in time, and every time I went down a trail that should be taking me home to the entrance of the park, I would bend back up at this tree, and I would stare at the roots of the tree. I was fixated on the base of this tree for no particular reason, and I have seen the tree before, but it's not really a tree that stands out. It doesn't really look particularly interesting, and again, the whole dream was me running through the woods as it's getting darker and darker, and I kept ending up at this tree and being transfixed at the base of the tree. So I wake up and I was like, that's kind of an odd dream to have, but it wasn't really, moved to action, I guess you could say, until it rained all week, and it was kind of on my mind, and I had another dream about it. Again, similar, me keep wandering through the woods, ending up at the base of the tree, but this time I actually had a distinct dream that there was a dead person under the tree, which I found really disturbing because I hadn't had a dream like that before. And I felt completely compelled after the second dream to go to the park. I don't know what I thought I would do. I just needed to go. So it rained all that week, and I said, rain or shine, I'm going to go on the weekend. And it did end up still being sprinkling rain, which actually helped me find the first button. They made these buttons at the mill, and it's the only unbroken button I've ever found, so it's worth keeping for sure. And something compelled me when I picked it up to keep digging. I couldn't say maybe it was for more buttons, because one button was certainly sufficient, but I just kept digging, and it felt right. So I grabbed a stick, because I didn't bring anything with me, and I just started digging away at the base of this tree, deep under the roots, as close to the roots as I could get, and that's how I discovered the leather bag with the human remains. And the bag was quite dilapidated and rotted. I didn't quite know what it was at first when I found it. I just pulled it out because I thought it was interesting, and it had bones in it. And the bones that I found was a complete human hand fallen apart into many pieces. The bones are quite old and dry, and I would say that there's some bones that might not be hand bones. I think I found a chunk of a femur, possibly. So there's this one part of bone that is kind of hard to identify what it could be. It's definitely bone. It's too lightweight to be stone. It's not wood. It's definitely porous like bone. And I still have in my possession a fingertip, as well as a little tie that came off of the leather bag.
I got a flashlight in my pocket. Hold on, got my water.
Okay. Something moved. I don't know if it's just noises playing tricks on me or...
That's so cool. This camera is so nice.
You hear all those noises?
Yeah. Some of them are bugs. And
This is recording still, right?
Unless you do some really, really deep history diving, things can be misconstrued, and stories and legends come up, but you always have to be careful, and having a good research team on your paranormal investigation team is definitely an asset to have.
I did contact the police, and I turned over the remaining bones to the police. They were going to look into it, But my interaction with the police wasn't that satisfactory. They only seemed interested if I had found a skull. And if I didn't find a skull, they weren't really going to look into it. They were going to donate the bones to their historic department to kind of do a little detailed search. And they said that they would contact me back. They never did. And so, in fact, I actually got in trouble because apparently you're not supposed to dig in a park. And they warned me that if I ever did it again, I would be charged with something, I don't know, like defamation of property or something like that. So I did actually get pretty upset because I had wanted it to be looked into a little bit further. I thought that there was a story there that needed to be told. And I can say I felt extremely protective of them after finding them. Like, I felt that I had been given the dreams and found the remains. Like, how crazy is that you have a dream that there's a dead person under a tree, you show up and there really is. And it's not a grave. People don't you don't bury a person right at the entrance of a business. This definitely wasn't a normal gravesite area.
Say to the top of this hill, but the hill kind of never ends. So. Maybe just into this clearing. I just don't really want to get lost in here.
No. All you gotta do is follow the markers on a tree. See?
Yeah. I know, but I end up going to another.
You're with me. You ain't getting lost.
Yeah. See if I see anything. And then we'll start going back, I guess. I hear the bat.
You want to... What was that? Nothing. Hello? Come on out, ghost.
So we've been here, we've explored the forest. I'd like to come back on a full moon. Last time I was here in a full moon, granted I didn't have my camera, but I heard what sounded like noises, whether it was the wind or noises. It sounded like a mix of the two. I don't hear that tonight. I hear a lot of animals. I'd like to say there's ghosts, but I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of noises, but natural noises, so hopefully when we come back we'll find something more, but if not, you know, it's all subject to interpretation over here. Maybe it's there. There are definitely some weird noises,
but no ghost. Another myth busted.
This is a human life that we're talking about, so obviously it has some importance. There's some rumors and legends about the mill that many grisly murders have taken place. And when you find human remains outside of a normal burial site, it's always kind of a little bit alarming. And there's a story that I think needs to be told because, you know, God sees everything, but there has been a lot of murders in Gay City that have had no justice be seen. So the fact that there was a couple of dreams and that a person or part of a person was found, there could be a reasonable explanation. The police officer told me that possibly someone had gotten their sleeve of their arm caught in the machinery back in the day and maybe lost a limb, but I think that it was quite purposely tied in a bag and buried. So I think that there is some sort of dark intent behind this, and it is important that everyone's story is told, especially if murder was committed possibly, or just the fact that this is a body where it's not traditionally supposed to be. So I think that that would be interesting as well. Why was this buried under a tree that actually looks to be the same age as the bones, like perhaps it was buried and a tree was planted on top.
There have been a series of deaths taking place at Gay City State Park, even after the known legends. A young girl drowned in 1970 while swimming in the pond, and there have been 2 other drownings, one in 1978 and one in 2011. Additionally, there has been a death ruled as a suicide in 1968 when a man was found dead in his car due to carbon monoxide poisoning. There may have been more deaths throughout the years, but these are the ones I have traced and that have been reported in past newspapers.
I think it's nice that, Hebron put it's got like the nice fencing and signage when you're driving by the park still, and they've done a pretty nice job upkeeping what they have of facilities there. They have like bathrooms and different picnic areas, and I feel like with the space that is there, it could be used more. But I think a lot of that comes down to bringing young people into the town and keeping the town young and fresh. And because when people get old, they don't go out as much as they used to. People who used to hike all those parts might not anymore as they age. So it's got to keep bringing young generations in who really appreciate that type of history and wildlife and the different experiences that you could really have at the park. So as much as it gives to the culture of Hebron, we got to give back culturally to the park so it maintains a very relevant role in the people that live here in their lives. So
people beyond the Hebron community, if you will, certainly are interested in this place. But the mills, Sturbridge Village, for example, is a reconstructed period of about 1830 in our history. They've taken mills and different things, standing structures from Connecticut, and restored them on their property for people to come as a living museum. I don't know that they took anything from Gay City specifically, but these places are of interest not only to restoration of the historic communities, but in terms of the archaeological ruins for historians and archaeologists to learn from in terms of the shifts that were going on here industrially, as well as from a shift from farming to industry, which really took off in the 19th centuries. Gay City is a kind of a capsule, kind of a time capsule of the late 18th into the 19th century, in changing in house styles, changing in communities, changing in industrial complexes. That really makes it important to historians and archaeologists. There's a lot to still be learned here through that kind of research.
This area of Connecticut was once a manufacturing center. Many towns have abandoned mills that basically are quite beautiful in their structures. However, it takes a lot of money to restore them in one way or another, but there are many success stories. Cheney Mills in Manchester, Kaplan's family has restored Roosevelt Mills in Rockville. Most of them seem to be on waterways, so therefore I'm sure there's a problem with pollution and what can be done to bring them up to today's standards. However, it's very sad to see so many of them with their broken windows and their weedy yards. So hopefully something can be done. What could possibly be done with Gay City, I don't know, but we saved one house.
It's at a great location. A lot of people live nice and close to it. It's a very residential area. It's held a good role here. It's built a lot of the, helped fortify a lot of the culture here, but just got to keep going. I still think there's potential to make the park even more of a desirable place to explore and check out.
I know I'm not going to stop learning about the park. I'm still going to be digging deeper, finding out more, because unfortunately a lot of the information is lost, but through a lot of digging you can find out more. But I wanted to thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. There was a lot to view, a lot to see, a lot to learn about. Like I said, I challenge you to find more. Our adventure here isn't done. There's a lot more to be learned about the park. I'm right out here. It's June 27th, 2019. I'm out in the front of the park. If you look down here, this is the front of the Park. We're on the side by Route 85 out here, Gay City State Park. Again, I thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and maybe next time we'll be doing this again in 20 years when we find out more information. Thanks. The water's definitely very active today. Very active. It's not usually this loud. It's just a can. Somebody littering. Wondering what it was. This water's going, man. This water is going. I never heard it rush this much. It's a lot stronger now than it was probably a couple months ago when I came here last. Pretty loud. Alright, I'm going to the mill site now. The water. Over on the water from what you can see. Alright, here we go. If you can hear me, make a noise. Not gonna hurt you. I come in peace. If you can hear me, make a noise. If you can hear me, make a noise. Sounds like gunshots.